In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro delivers a wide-ranging critique of contemporary American political and cultural discourse, focusing on what he perceives as a pervasive mindset of self-loathing toward the United States. Shapiro dissects various topics, from controversial statements by public figures to Supreme Court rulings, foreign policy challenges, and the internal struggles of the Democratic Party. Throughout, he emphasizes the importance of recognizing and defending the unique principles that make America great, while condemning the moral relativism and cynicism that undermine national unity and strength. Shapiro opens by addressing a recent statement from Whoopi Goldberg on The View, where she equated the experience of being black in America in 2025 to that of being a woman or a gay person in Iran under a fundamentalist regime. He finds this comparison not only absurd, but emblematic of a broader trend of moral relativism and anti-American sentiment prevalent on both the left and right wings of the so-called horseshoe theory. Goldberg's claim, which downplays the brutal realities faced by marginalized groups in authoritarian regimes, reflects a mindset that diminishes America's unique freedoms and achievements by equating it with oppressive states. Shapiro traces this self-critical attitude back to figures like Barack Obama, who, while initially emphasizing America's aspirational ideals, later adopted a more pessimistic view that America has always been fundamentally flawed. This narrative, Shapiro argues, is historically inaccurate and politically damaging. It conflates America's imperfections with moral equivalence to regimes that systematically violate human rights on a far more severe scale. He warns that such relativism erodes the ability to define and defend what truly makes America exceptional: its Constitution, principles of limited government, free speech, and individual liberty. Turning to recent judicial developments, Shapiro highlights the Supreme Court's decision affirming that states can ban medical interventions related to gender transition for minors. He contrasts the majority opinion with the dissent by Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who argued that such bans constitute sex discrimination and should be subject to intermediate scrutiny. Shapiro finds the dissent's reasoning flawed and politically motivated, suggesting that without the Trump-appointed justices, the court might have struck down these bans, effectively mandating the medical transing of children. The reaction from Democrats, including Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, is portrayed as extreme and out of touch with public opinion. Shapiro supports the idea that Republicans should push federal legislation to prohibit such medical treatments for minors nationwide, forcing Democrats to take a clear stance on a contentious issue. This, he argues, would expose the left's radical position and galvanize conservative voters. A significant portion of the podcast is devoted to the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran, with Shapiro providing a detailed analysis of the military and diplomatic situation. He praises Israel's precision strikes against Iranian nuclear and military facilities, noting the relatively low civilian casualties and the strategic targeting of key assets. In contrast, he condemns Iran's missile attacks on civilian areas in Israel, including hospitals and kindergartens, labeling these actions as war crimes. Shapiro underscores President Trump's consistent stance against an Iranian nuclear weapon, emphasizing that Trump has long advocated for the denuclearization of Iran without regime change or nation-building. He criticizes those who misrepresent Trump's position as hawkish or interventionist, clarifying that the goal is limited and focused: prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. The podcast also explores the potential consequences of Iranian retaliation, including the activation of proxy terrorist groups. Shapiro argues that any full-scale attack on American forces by Iran would be suicidal for the regime, likely leading to its collapse. He supports a pragmatic approach that prioritizes American interests without unnecessary entanglements, echoing the views of realist foreign policy scholars who advocate for targeted actions rather than prolonged occupations. Shapiro critiques the Democratic Party's response to the conflict, highlighting statements from senators who question the wisdom of supporting Israel's actions or who suggest America should prioritize domestic issues over foreign engagements. He dismisses these positions as naive and dangerous, warning that undermining American military credibility in the Middle East weakens deterrence against other global adversaries like China and Russia. Shapiro then shifts to the contentious issue of immigration, focusing on recent proposals to screen visa applicants for ideological hostility toward American values. He supports efforts by figures like Senator Marco Rubio to prevent the entry of individuals who openly oppose the United States or support terrorist organizations such as Hamas. Shapiro finds it baffling that some on both the left and right oppose such screening on free speech grounds, arguing that importing people who hate America undermines national cohesion and security. He contrasts this with the left's push for mass amnesty and open borders, exemplified by Representative Maxwell Frost's call for a speedy path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. Shapiro views this as part of a broader leftist agenda that denies America's unique identity and sovereignty. He also critiques Democratic politicians who equate immigration enforcement with fascism, pointing to the example of Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass and MSNBC's rhetoric against ICE agents. The podcast highlights the internal turmoil within the Democratic National Committee, reporting on financial struggles, leadership conflicts, and a lack of unity against Republican opposition. Shapiro notes that fundraising has slowed, and the party is reportedly considering borrowing money to cover expenses. He suggests that this financial and organizational chaos reflects broader problems within the party, including ideological incoherence and disconnect from mainstream American voters. Shapiro also discusses the New York City mayoral race, focusing on candidate Zoran Mamani, whom he portrays as emblematic of the Democratic Party's problematic direction. Mamani's past associations with anti-Semitic groups and his theatrical displays of emotion are criticized as signs of weakness and insincerity. Shapiro warns that electing such figures will accelerate the decline of major urban centers and drive away productive citizens. Turning to domestic politics, Shapiro covers the recent Senate hearing on President Joe Biden's alleged cognitive decline and the purported cover-up by his administration. He notes the near-total boycott of the hearing by Senate Democrats, framing it as an attempt to avoid accountability. Shapiro emphasizes the seriousness of the issue, arguing that the American public deserves transparency about who has been effectively running the country during Biden's presidency. Finally, Shapiro touches on economic matters, including Federal Reserve statements about interest rates and inflation, particularly in relation to tariffs on China. He expresses cautious optimism that if tariffs are managed carefully and combined with strong foreign policy, the U.S. economy can remain robust. He also warns about the looming insolvency of Social Security and Medicare, highlighting projections that benefits could be cut drastically within a decade if reforms are not enacted. Shapiro laments the bipartisan failure to address entitlement spending, calling it a ticking time bomb for the American economy.